Today, I'm going to use science and definitely not magic to de-rust our chassis again. Having left our chassis for so long since we lasered away all the original rust, cut out the rot and welded in all of the fresh repair panels, thanks to a really cold, damp winter and lots of condensation, all that unprotected clean metal has been corroded again. So now we're almost back to where we were over a year ago. The outside of our chassis is rusty once again. And we certainly can't bolt on all of those lovely new parts until the chassis has been properly preserved. Also, after the laser cleaning, loads of you were concerned that the inside of our chassis was still rusty. So I'm going to use a chemical process to magically transform both the outside and the inside of our chassis back to clean metal with almost no effort at all, giving me plenty of time for procrastination, distraction, and more tea. You might have noticed that our welding isn't finished yet either. We've left the ends off to allow as much access to the inside as possible, and John has left this patch unwelded so we can get a better look inside the chassis to see how well things have gone. Perhaps the most interesting area of rust is here, where the new patches have corroded at different speeds to the older metal. The heat treatment of the welding process and the differing alloy of steel in the welding wire have all influenced the speed of the new corrosion. But it's all got to go. Helpfully, a number of you have suggested we should crack on with this project, so let's do exactly that. A while back, I was trying to restore the Range Rover's rusty fuel tank, and I tested a whole list of chemicals. I even included the fizzy drink cola, just to test the urban myth. But almost immediately, there was one product that seemed different to all of the others. There was a clear winner. Now these little chaps have been stewing for about 24 hours now, but even after only half an hour there was a clear winner beginning to emerge, but I thought I'd let the others catch up. But actually, it's doing such a good job. Look at that, there's no rust there whatsoever at all. All of the other treatments used chemical reactions of some sort to convert, dissolve or reduce the rust. But Evaporust does things differently. It's a powerful non-toxic mix of chemicals, and the magic process is called chelation, although it's actually spelt chelation. Chelation comes from chela, the ancient Greek word for claw. The compound of molecules that make up the chelating agent are joined together in the shape of a claw, represented by this croissant. Now these crescent-shaped structures have things called carboxylate ligands at each tip, and these have spare electrons, so overall they are negatively charged. The iron in rust, or iron oxide molecules, is a positively charged ion, and because these iron atoms bonded to the oxide are missing electrons, they are positively charged. These opposite charges mean the claw of the chelation agent is naturally attracted to the iron in the iron oxide, and can bind easily to it, so pulling it off from the surface of the metal into the liquid. The chelator is a very weak acid, and so it has spare protons which react with the oxygen liberated from the rust. So rather than escaping as a gas, the oxygen combines with the chelator's spare protons to form water. Which is why virgin Evaporust starts with a slightly acidic pH of 6.1, but by the time it's completely spent, it can have a neutral pH of about 7, so it doesn't need to be neutralized before disposal. The chelator is expensive stuff, so an organic chemical that easily loses sulfur to form ferric sulfate, represented by the Scotch eggs, is added to remove the iron from the iron chelator complex. This allows the chelator to remove more iron from the iron oxide. The sulfur-bearing compound is much less expensive than the chelator, and that makes Evaporust much more economical to use. The real magic of Evaporust's selective chelator is that its claw is just the right size for the iron to fit inside, so other metals aren't affected. But also, since the iron in iron metal is not a charged iron, it is neutral in its elemental form, the chelator cannot bind to it to release it from the rest of the uncorroded steel, so it doesn't remove or harm the underlying good metal. So unlike other chemical and mechanical methods like acids, alkalis, laser ablating and sandblasting, which all eat away at the iron surface, chelation only removes the rust or iron oxide molecules, revealing the good base metal, but leaving it completely unscathed. Now, interestingly, chelating agents are actually a hidden part of our everyday lives. They occur naturally and were first synthesized back in 1935. Turmeric powder is a natural way to remove unwanted heavy metals in the body while leaving biologically important ones intact. Chelators are in bathroom and shower cleaners to help grab hold of the calcium in the chalky calcium carbonate deposits from hard water. They're also used to help keep iron suspended in a solution of liquid plant fertilizer. The same kind of chemistry is used by our blood's hemoglobin to grab and release gases when we breathe, and by plants when they use chlorophyll to photosynthesize. It's beautiful chemistry, and it's everywhere. For small to medium parts, it's probably best just to drop them into a tank or container of the liquid evaporust. But for much larger or immovable objects, then a brush-on gel version would probably be more efficient. But so many of you are worried about the inside of our chassis that I needed to find a way to actually completely submerge the chassis to be sure that the liquid gets to absolutely everywhere. Now, we could dangle the chassis from the loader as we did when we were washing it, but I don't want to cover any of the surface up or risk the chassis tipping and potentially actually bursting a hole in our container. So instead, I think I'll use a little bit of studding to suspend the chassis from the lift and let it do the heavy lifting. Because the chassis has got this kind of natural dip, it'd probably be clever to actually spin the whole thing around 180 degrees, and then that way it's actually going to sit slightly better over the base of the ramp, because obviously I want to get it as deep into our magic liquid as possible. So our chassis is now dangling, ready for dunking. All we need now is a really big container. Well, that's definitely going to do the job. It's only just bigger than the chassis. We wanted to minimize the amount of liquid we're going to have to use, but we're definitely going to need quite a bit. Luckily, you can use Evaporust again and again until it's so full of iron it's actually black in color. Only the water evaporates over time. So, as every little helps, I think we're going to need quite a bit more of this. So, Thankfully it comes in bigger containers. Now essentially, over this process, only the water is the thing that evaporates away. You can just add a bit more of that, and you can just use it again and again and again. Another one. Well, by the time I filled up this pool using 5-litre containers, our chassis will have completely rusted away. But I think there was a slightly more efficient way of doing this. So that is what nearly 2,000 litres of evaporous looks like in a swimming pool. To be honest, the pool could have been slightly longer and perhaps slightly narrower, so I get a bit more fluid around the chassis. And maybe, worst case, I'm gonna have to do one half at a time just to make sure that I get full coverage. Or perhaps I could even change the shape of the pool, but that sounds really complicated. So I think the moment of truth has arrived. Let's pop it into the pool. I'll make extra special care I don't pierce it with the ends of the chassis, and then hopefully our chelation can start. Oh, wow, now we are dangerously close with the chassis at that end of the pool. Oh, I'm just going to put a little bit of protection so when it slides down it doesn't just kind of rip through our plastic. I don't really want all this lovely liquid all over my floor. I think I may have just about got away with this. I used some plastic box lids to cover the ends of the chassis to stop it tearing through our pool liner, so hopefully we won't have any disastrous leaks. But the main thing is I've managed to completely submerge about half of the chassis. and the chelation has already started. So those iron oxide molecules have been kind of pulled away from the rest of the iron. So that is fantastic. I now need to leave it to stew for quite some time. And then when I come back to it, I can flip the chassis over and do the other half. But the good news is, it means I now get to kind of have a cup of tea, kick back a little bit, maybe get on with some jobs that I've been meaning to do for quite some time. Come on, give us a hand, get my subscribers up to 1 million. You know it makes sense. Only have to subscribe once though. Checking in on the progress is the only effort I need to exert. No scrubbing or agitating is necessary. Oh, this is exciting. I think they're ready. Oh, look at that! A fresh batch of my brand new t-shirt, I Feel the Need for Tea. Available on the merch shelf below, but also on greasedonkey.com. The chemistry is endothermic, so it requires some ambient heat to work. In temperatures below 5 degrees C, the reaction is severely retarded. At 15 to 20 degrees C, it's pleasantly quick, and at 35 to 50 degrees, it's very active indeed. Higher temperatures do not harm the liquid, but with worker safety in mind, they aren't necessary. Evaporust does not harm aluminium, brass, copper, vinyl, plastic, wiring, rubber, chrome, or non-oxide paint. There are no heavy fumes, bad odours except for a tiny whiff of sulphur, or volatile organic compounds. It's non-hazardous, non-corrosive, non-flammable, and poses no environmental or health hazards at all. Light rust is removed in as little as 5 to 30 minutes. Medium rust up to 6 hours, and heavy rust takes up to 24 hours. Well, John's chassis has actually been chelating for about 36 hours or so. All the surface rust that had been gained over the last year of just idly waiting around in the workshop, that actually dropped off within about sort of the first 2 to 4 hours. It was actually very quick, but the much more ingrained stuff, the stuff that even the laser couldn't get to, that took a little bit longer. So the 36 hours, I mean, to be honest, I could have left it in here another week, and all it's going to do is remove any more last little bits of rust. It's never going to damage the surface of the steel, but it looks absolutely amazing. I mean, it looks like brand new metal under there, doesn't it?
It looks fantastic. Really, really amazing.
It is quite a transformation.
Apart from this little hole down here. Which is
well, see now, there's the little thing there. As you can see, actually, where John's pointing on this sort of the spring sort of point, because it's a little bit of a bucket, it's actually collected a lot of the iron. So as the iron oxide gets converted to iron sulfate, then obviously that collects, it drops out of the liquid. And so I had a little bit of a rub in a couple of the corners over time just to see if I could disturb what was collecting. And actually if you do the same thing with the paintbrush now, so you can see what should happen, you just basically just wash that away. And then once all that cloud of rust has actually cleared, you'll see that what's been going on is the chelate has actually been sort of working away, just plucking off that iron oxide away from our nice fresh steel. So now, hopefully,
My God.
once
Look
it's
at that.
cleared, that's actually looking pretty good. So if that's worked on the outside, we can guarantee pretty much it's doing that on the inside. And in fact, you can see just down there on John's little slot there that we left, you can see that at least one part of that surface has already gone back to bare metal, which is wonderful. So now what you do is just quickly flip our chassis over, drop it back in for another 36 hours or so, just to be really thorough, and hopefully we'll have a completely de-rusted chassis both inside and out. Now this is actually quite an exciting moment because we're going to obviously lift it out and have a little look and see exactly how good this is. Wow. That is amazing. What do these ends look like? It's quite dark in the ends, but I think once it's brushed off,
Yeah.
and you can see at the ends here that actually, you know, it looks quite dark, but you can see it's no longer rust. So actually we now know that the inside is definitely going in the right direction. So I think by the time we've turned it over and have a really good investigate inside, this is going to be quite wonderful. And it's lovely again when we had our sort of different or discoloured bits of steel because of the welding, and that rust was all in different places. That's all gone away as well. That's all been removed. I mean, this is a good little process, isn't it?
Absolutely amazing.
Liking this a lot. Oh, hello.
I think we've just touched.
That'll do. That's enough just to, so it's the, that's fine, we're all good actually.
We're sitting on the middle, aren't we?
Yeah, well, we're actually on the ramp, so we'll just probably, we'll see in a minute if we're losing liquid. Well, it would seem we have actually managed to get away with only using 2,000 litres of Evaporust. So we flipped the chassis over, actually was a little bit easier than I was expecting, so that's nice, and now we're definitely way over the tide mark. I will probably pop in a little bit more water because we seem to be losing quite a bit overnight. It's quite warm in here, which is obviously good for the chemical reaction, but also does mean that you lose a little bit of water, and it's fine just to put a bit more back in just to keep things level.
Look at that.
Lovely. I've been so busy procrastinating, I almost forgot what we're actually supposed to be doing here. So let's see how we're getting on. Wow, what a transformation. That is amazing. Hello, John, perfect timing.
Good morning.
Well, we've had our chassis, at least the underside, now stewing for at least 48 hours. Had loads of other things to be getting on with, and you can see, perhaps the most concerning thing is the colour of our liquid. Obviously when we put it in, it was mostly golden with a bit of sediment at the bottom, and now it is almost black. It's like a kind of a treacly colour. Although interestingly, I can see to the very bottom, just about through all that thickness, to the bottom of the pool, so the sediment has gone away. Now, obviously we know this is kind of what happens to evaporust over time. Obviously, the more it absorbs, the darker it gets. So I think what's happened now is that obviously that initial iron oxide that kind of dropped off the chassis and was pooling in the bottom has now had enough time to kind of reabsorb or been converted into iron sulfate. And that's why it's now in suspension. That's why it is kind of clearish to the bottom. But the good news, if that is the case, is that all of the rust on the outside has been reabsorbed, but also that will be the same case on the inside of our chassis, which of course was the whole point of this big palaver. So I guess the only way we're going to find this out is by hoiking it out of the liquid and see what we have on the inside. I can see loads of stuff coming out. Grab the ends. Right then, wow. The very exciting thing is looking through your little patch there, the little hole, I can see really shiny clean metal, but it's also slightly obscured by sort of like this kind of darker sort of iron oxide again, so, or at least this, or maybe the iron sulfate. So obviously what's been going on, in fact, it does smell quite suspicious as well. Lots of egginess going on, as you might expect, because of the sulfur side of things. So now we've got it fully out of the evaporust, it does look absolutely amazing. I mean, when you think how rusty it was before.
This is amazing.
No, it really is, isn't it? I mean, it's quite the transformation.
No manual work at all.
Well, that's the thing. I mean, there was a tiny bit of vegetation with the paintbrush just so we could see what was going on, but really that is quite incredible. Now, interestingly, looking at the inside of the chassis, you can see that there's plenty of clean metal, but also there's quite a lot of these kind of dark deposits. And of course, that is the iron sulfate. Didn't really have anywhere to go, so it needs to be cleaned off. Now, if you had a slightly simpler bit of metal that you just cleaned with the evaporust, what you could do is actually just leave it as is, let the evaporust dry on the surface, and that'll give you maybe a couple of weeks of protection. Now, obviously, I don't know how long it's going to be before I get round to actually getting this thing galvanized. Poor John has been waiting very patiently for quite some time now, but we all get there. Now, the thing about that is that obviously I want to make sure that it's going to be protected a bit longer. So what I need to do really is get this outside. We're just going to give it a bit of a clean with some water, just wash away all the evaporust, give it a nice dry, of course, before it starts rusting again. And then we're going to coat it with a protective coating, a bit of oil, just to stop that from rusting any further until we're ready to process it a bit later on. But while looking at our chassis, Evaporust has done an amazing job of removing all of that rust, all of that iron oxide. And you can see, of course, how much it's removed just by looking at the colour of the liquid in the pool itself. Evaporust has the ability to remove 300 grams of dry rust for every 5 litres of liquid. And as we have nearly 2,000 litres here in this tank, that would mean that if it was completely spent, we would have removed 120 kilograms of rust from our chassis. And I'm pretty sure we haven't done it. It was bad, but it wasn't that bad. And that means this liquid is good to go again. So we're just going to suck it out, put it into some containers and save it for another day. If it was totally spent, then it would be completely safe to dispose of this biodegradable solution in drains and sewers. Obviously check with your local authority first, but essentially ferric sulfate solution is plant food, and it's particularly good for ericaceous plants like rhododendrons. But I wouldn't recommend it because you don't know what other nasties are actually in your spent Evaporust solution. You know, things like the inside of some horrible vintage old radiator, or even worse, the filth from inside a Range Rover chassis. Right then, John, I guess we better find a way of draining this out and then get this nice and clean.
You keep sucking it up, sucking it up, suck it. Look, I'll be back. I'll be back. You don't even need to touch. Just one look and I got you hooked. I'll be back for you. I'll be back.
So, in the cold light of day, it would seem that Evaporust can indeed perform scientific magic. Our chassis has been transformed. Now, when I said clean, you can in fact actually leave the Evaporust on your part to dry, and that will give it about 6 to 8 weeks of protection. But just in case I get distracted a little longer than that, again, let's go belt and braces and wash off the residue thoroughly with water. Now obviously it is a little counterintuitive to wash off the protective layer of Evaporust with rust-inducing water, but I want to blast off any remaining ferric sulfate deposits and make sure the inside of our chassis is rust-free. Now I was planning to use this bar I bolted onto the chassis here to actually suspend it from the telehandler, and then I could actually get full orientation and wash out the inside, but on second thought I think it's better to leave the Evaporust protecting the inside of our chassis until we galvanise it. Well, as we hope, the inside looks just as good as the outside, which means the chassis is completely rust-free. But if I leave it like this, it will be rusty again in no time. So thanks to a light breeze and some towels, the Evaporust has dried out nicely. And to give the chassis a better hope of staying rust-free, I'm now going to spray everywhere with AC90, which will give us much longer not to get round to the next stage of this Range Rover refurb. Spray your part from a distance of about 25 centimetres. Don't worry about overspray, get it in everywhere, all the nooks and crannies. AC90 displaces moisture and protects against rust. It's non-conductive and insoluble in water. It does have a flash point of about 43 degrees though, so let the solvent dissipate for 10 minutes before firing up a machine or that engine that you're protecting. That looks so good, and at least it's now ready to wait until I'm ready to pop it into the trailer and take it to be hot dip galvanised, so the outside and the inside will be protected from John's off-road abuse. But that is a job for another day.
Ed, can I borrow your trailer?
Sure. What have you done?
I think I've just bought the cheapest Ferrari in Europe.
Really?